It's a sure thing. Change, change. Expect a miracle change. Watch me change when you change the way you look at things. The things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now do change. Change.
Good afternoon and welcome to Spirit Cafe. I'm Barbara Schreiner-Trudell.
And I'm Cheryl Rogers.
And today we are talking about M.A.I.D, medically assisted dying. Great conversation. But to begin, let's start with a land acknowledgement. We are honored to work, live, and play on the historical and traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. As we gather from many places on Turtle Island, we as settlers are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We acknowledge the Indigenous stewards of this land. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. And we also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous people have made both in shaping and strengthening our community and all of the lands within the Turtle Island. We know that we are one, we realize our history, and we choose to create a new reality. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Well, Cheryl, howdy, Wayne, how are you? We are excited to be talking about medically assisting death. So we watched a W5 episode that brought up a whole lot of questions about this that kind of got us a little riled up here. Now, new laws in Canada this year will make it possible for people with mental illness to get a medically assisted death from a doctor. So, Cheryl, how are you feeling about all of this?
Wow. Well, so watching W5, it was very interesting. And, I recommend people watch it just to see what comes up for them, right? Because there were so much that came up for me. I was writing notes and I was like, oh my goodness. Before I go into that, what is the I? I know it's medically assisted dying. Do we know what the I is? I never looked it up.
Medical assistance in death.
In death.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it just brought up a whole lot of things, questions for me, because there were different views, right? There was a view from a man who has suffered chronic PTSD. He's tried to commit suicide twice in his life. He's tried everything, therapies. He's had every drug you can think of. He's had 19 shock therapy treatments. You name it. He's had it and he's tried it. And what he calls his mental illness is incurable. Yeah. And I'm not surprised when you listen to his life story. He's a journalist. He went to 78 countries. He covered 35 war zones. The atrocities that he saw are unthinkable. And so what happens now is he has nightmares every single night. He suffers from anxiety. He goes into a sweat. He wakes up dreading the day because it means that there's another night to go through. Yeah.
You take a look. I mean, I think when I look at the whole idea of war, I find it, kind of well, I find it kind of insane in and of itself, because what we're trying to do is get people to see our point of view, and so we just kill them to make them do that. But I think that killing people is not natural for most of us. It's not something that we can do easily, or watch the horrors of war, which of course go way beyond shooting somebody. It's the starvation and the poor conditions all around, the suffering of children and families. Like, the whole thing doesn't make sense. And when you look at what this man went through as a journalist traveling around the world, I think he was in 39 different war zones over his life. I mean, he's seen things that I don't even want to mention,
Yeah.
because they're so horrific that even letting those words come out my mouth is too much. So when we look at his choice to die, like, yes, yes, let
Yeah.
this, he started his paperwork. It's going to become legal this year in Canada, 2023, and he will be able to make that choice. And I'm pretty sure, given his situation, that he will be approved.
Yeah.
Do it.
And
Do
not
it.
only that, his wife supports him, his children support him, which
Mm.
tells me they've obviously seen the trauma that this man goes through and has experienced. So that in itself for me is huge. Like, how many loved ones would actually support you in doing that if they didn't know that you were really suffering?
Exactly, exactly. And right now in Canada, I think most people who opt for MAID are people suffering with cancer that can't be cured. And there's a story of one man where, as they administered the drug, his wife was curled up beside him in bed. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Rather than him suffering a few more months, he's able to go, you know what, this is debilitating. It cannot be cured. And I don't want to live like this. And I know for myself, I've said to my husband and to my children that should I develop Parkinson's like my father had, or Alzheimer's, I want to be able to choose this,
Yeah.
because this is, I don't want to live like that. And one of the comments that was made is that, they're worried that some people want to opt for MAID because they, don't want their family suffering. Well, that's exactly why I would do it with Alzheimer's, because I'm obviously going to forget everything. But the truth is, that's a horrible way to live, where your family has to tell you every day the same information. When
Yeah.
you're asking a question about, well, where's my husband? Well, your husband died 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just lots of questions about it. But when I was watching the thing, there was one young woman who has, quite severe mental trauma, and she's actually worried about this law because she's afraid she might choose it when she's in a state.
Yeah. So
And
this is so interesting. There's so much that comes up for me. There's so many directions that this can go in. So one of the things that it said was that it can't be approved during a state of crisis. So
right,
there are some sort of guidelines, right? And if you're in crisis, that's not a time that it will be approved. The whole thing about it is, first of all, freedom of choice. Is
freedom of
this a state decision? Should the government be making these decisions? Or is this a choice that you, or any human being has over their own body? And I suppose that's like the abortion laws as well, right? Who controls my body? Who controls what I can and can't do with my body? When there was a question in there, when is it state sanctioned suicide, or is it freedom of choice? So there's so many discussions that can come from this. And one of the things I thought about is some of the reactions we have are so strong because we are conditioned.
Yeah.
Right?
And we fear death. We fear it. Well,
and
many.
we're conditioned to say what's right and wrong, that suicide is wrong, or let's not call it suicide, let's call taking your own life is wrong, right? So we've given all these things meaning, and we've made laws around them and regulations, and so it's so ingrained in us that obviously we're going to have this huge reaction to it. But there are many questions that arise around it.
Way more questions than there are answers, for sure. And I know for me that, when I think about the right to die, I think we should have that right. If my dog gets very, very sick, rather than having the dog suffer until the natural point of passing, I can go to the vet or have a vet come to my home and gently let that animal go. We should be doing that with our people. I watched my father, disintegrate into nothingness. Like he couldn't sit up. He couldn't do anything, right? The Parkinson's had him completely disabled. And the Alzheimer's meant he had no idea, who was there, who they were, things like that. He couldn't recognize most things. He couldn't feed himself, nothing. And so at the end, it was just letting him wither away. Why do that? Like that to me is inhumane. And we wouldn't do it to our dog. Why do we do it to our loved ones? And I suppose the other question is, will somebody, sort of want to do this for somebody because, if I get rid of my dad, then I'll get the inheritance, like there are questions, but I think there's lots of sort of points that have to be met before this can occur. And the other thing is, when you think about death and dying from our perspective as metaphysicians, we thought people, we believe in the continuity of the soul, which is what makes us who we are. So the truth is that death is an illusion.
Yeah. Neil Donald Walsh calls it our continuation day, because we continue elsewhere, right? But interesting that you mentioned, that we put our pets, our beloved pets, out of suffering by choosing euthanasia, and they call assisted dying death in Europe. I'm not sure if it's all of Europe or just Holland. They call it euthanasia.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. So in Canada in 2016, medically assisted dying became legal for those who had terminal illnesses. And then 5 years later, for those who have debilitating physical ailments, like ALS and
Parkinson's.
Yeah, exactly, and Parkinson's and all those, right? So that was 2021, and now they're looking to legalize it for persons with mental health issues. So, obviously there's a huge debate around that. You don't see mental health physically. A person looks, and it's also legitimate in Switzerland, Fiona's sharing with us. But you don't see, a person looks normal. They look healthy, but you don't actually see and understand the pain, the anguish, and what goes through their minds on a daily basis. So it's very interesting. So I'm wondering, those who are here, if you can type into the chat, are you for medically assisted dying or against?
Personal opinions would be wonderful here. I'm definitely for it. Cheryl, how about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is taking your own life. It's a decision you're making, which I believe in freedom of choice.
Yeah.
So whether I believe in medically assisted dying or not, I think my answer is yes, because I believe in freedom of choice. And I don't believe that anybody should be telling us what we can and can't do. You know, my understanding was that governments that were formed and the police bodies and all that were formed to protect us, but to protect us in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? Not to control us. And it's become, for me, I think, very much control.
Absolutely.
You know, and so we've crossed that line, and I don't believe that we are a democracy anymore. I don't. I believe we are a police-run state. You know, I love Canada. Please don't get me wrong. It's a beautiful country. It's far better than most countries in the world.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of freedom. Okay. And I do that because it's perceived freedom.
It is perceived freedom. Yes.
Right.
Well, and we found that out here when we were talking about COVID and vaccines and all stuff. One of our guests, shared some opinions that were not accepted globally, and of course, we got booted off of YouTube for that episode. So we're being a little more careful about what we say.
We're being controlled.
We're being controlled. Freedom of speech is not a reality. It is something that, you know, as long as you're towing a line to a degree, then you can have freedom of speech. Fiona says that she believes that it's a personal choice and respect that many people experience invisible suffering.
I agree 100%.
If you're living in hell, you should be able to escape it. And I know that, you know, suicide's an interesting conversation anyway, because again, you know, we have such views on death and dying. There's so much fear around it. There's so much, I don't know, there's just so much misinformation or misunderstanding or whatever. And my stepbrother committed suicide when he was 37. And when a couple of days after, in meditation, he came to me in that meditation, and he was a beam of love and light. And he just explained to me, I don't know how the communication happened, but he explained to me that it was a decision. He couldn't figure out how to get out of his current position that he was in, and that this actually freed him. And it was the perfect decision for him. So, you know, we sometimes think, like, my question always when somebody takes their life is, when they're on the other side, because our soul is our soul is our soul and continues, is anything different? That's one of the questions that always comes to my mind. When it was for my brother, absolutely, there was a difference for sure. The other thing that I actually truly, truly believe is that all death is chosen. Time, place, and how. And that, you know, it's like we complete our life cycle and we've decided what's an acceptable way to go. Well, cancer is acceptable because the people around me will understand. And after I've suffered long enough, they'll be okay letting me go. But I think at a soul level, at a subconscious level, we're not conscious of it, but at a subconscious level, I believe that we actually do decide our own dying.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, absolutely. You know, for those of us that believe that we do have a plan before we come here. Oh, I spelled committed wrong. I left out an M.
Okay, we'll forgive your spelling. That's okay.
Thank you.
Suicide is that most people who attempt it don't accomplish it.
Right.
And then they end up in a worse position because they've got damaged body, you know, like all sorts of things have happened to them while they were out that actually impairs their lives even further.
Yeah, exactly. And I've just heard that, you know, committed has a negative connotation. And I think in suicide circles, they prefer to use the term completed suicide.
Yeah.
As it was a choice, right? It was a choice, and they chose to do something and completed it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As we're talking about this, what about, like, I know there's many women out there who
Mhm.
have taken their lives because of being in a really abusive relationship and not knowing how to get out. Should they have the right?
Well, it's very interesting because there was a young lady, and you mentioned her, who is speaking against medical assisted dying for mental health because she's concerned that the new legislation won't protect her from herself.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so as we mentioned, you're not going to be able to do it in a crisis situation. However, she brought up a very good point, and that is that how would anybody know? Because she's lied before. And
Yeah.
so have I. I suffer from mental illness. I'm on antidepressants. I have been for 32 years. My father was manic depressive. I've seen that side of things, and so the thing is that when somebody says, you go to the doctor and they say, so do you have a plan? Right? Do you have a plan? Like, are you seriously thinking about committing suicide or completing suicide? And who's going to say yes if they are? Right?
Yeah, that's the thing. The person who's ready to do it doesn't talk about it.
Exactly.
They simply
Exactly.
do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I've had a number of people around me who have completed suicide, and they have, like, there's been no forewarning
hmm
to all the rest of us.
hmm
It's like,
They put
except
on a
one,
front. There's a face. I
there's a
had no
face that you know.
idea. I should have seen the signs. Right?
Nope, they
There was
hide it
another
well.
there was another woman, and I really admired what she said. She is a mother, and she said, I wrote notes somewhere. I can't really see them, but she said that something about dying a peaceful, dignified death rather than completing suicide and having her children have to live
Yes.
with that stigma,
Yeah,
right?
that was
But rather
beautiful.
her children knowing that she made this decision in sound mind. It was a choice she had. It
Yeah.
might be something you can even discuss with your family
Yeah.
ahead of time, right? So it doesn't have to be traumatic for everyone.
Yeah, because of course, suicide, the way it's generally done, somebody finds them.
Mhm.
The person gets found by a relative or whatever, and there's a whole trauma around that is really, as a person who facilitates celebration of life services, I've done a few for people who have completed suicide, and the family is like distraught,
Mhm.
devastated
Mhm.
beyond had the death occurred in a different way. And I think part of that comes from our religious training and upbringing.
Yeah.
Religions have decided that this is bad and wrong. And so we've agreed with that. Whether we've done it consciously or unconsciously is irrelevant, but we've agreed.
Yeah.
That agreement needs to change.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's the big thing is, how can we be compassionate when we look at the suffering that's going on, and especially when somebody has done all the work. Like, there was one doctor, I think he was from the Netherlands, who talked about, the Canadian rules for medically assisted dying are a little bit lenient when it comes to mental health issues. And he had a concern about that because they have different rules in the Netherlands about how that can be handled. And there was, I can't remember what he said. I don't know if you made a note about that or not, but he was definitely saying the rules need to be a little bit tighter.
Mhm.
easier than what we have come up with so far. And I don't know what the rules are exactly yet,
Mhm.
but we'll find out in
Well,
short.
and again, I come back to freedom of choice.
Me too.
Rules, laws, regulations. Where's freedom of choice? What is government's role? And that those questions that we have. The other thing, though, I did think about as well is what about people who are not what we call in their right mind and don't know that? People who might have personality disorders or schizophrenia or manic depression. When somebody is manic, they believe that they are God or all powerful, or or Superman, or whatever you want to. They're living in a different reality. Not to say it's not a real reality. Who knows? So many dimensions and other things that we could talk about. But it's what do you do then? Does somebody make that decision for you?
Well, and the thing is, many schizophrenic people commit suicide.
Because
They complete it because they can't live with the constant noise that is going on in their heads. And so that becomes more common with schizophrenia. At what point could a parent or a sibling or a spouse go, my partner is really struggling, will not stay on the medication, and more questions than answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time for a commercial break. So let's sit with what's been done. If you have any questions, comments, or conundrums, please put them in the chat so we can address them when we get back. You're watching Spirit Cafe with Cheryl and Barbara, and we will be right back. Don't go away.
New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Well, today we're talking about medically assisted dying and sort of the for and against topic.
Positively inspiring, courageous conversations.
Yes, we will talk about anything here. Spirit Cafe. Spirit Cafe is all about talking about everything that nobody's comfortable talking about.
Yeah. And it really is about creating the conversation. It's not about judgment. It's not about blame or shame or it's not about what I believe, what Barbara believes. It is and it isn't, in that it's about bringing things up that are topics that need to be spoken about and having that conversation and being okay with agreeing to disagree at times.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. So
yeah, that works perfectly. My
yeah.
husband and I manage that one quite well. You know,
One of the
we
things
really agree.
that I really think is important to talk about is in Canada, especially, and I don't know about in other places, but a very important point that came up is this young lady who is really suffering with depression and anxiety and all these things has been waiting 6 years for a psychiatrist.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so
the time.
that's the issue I think that needs to be addressed is our mental health system. 1 in 3 adults have access to mental health.
And
One
1 in 5 children.
exactly in Canada have access to mental health. How many people do not have access? The other point she brought up is that she can't afford to take the medication all the time. So sometimes she cuts her medication in half, or she doesn't take it until she can afford to buy it again. Not every, in Canada, you have to pay for medication unless you're lucky enough to work for a company or have a health plan, or that has a health plan.
Well, and different provinces have different rules. So
Okay.
in Ontario, you do not have to pay for medication if you are under the age of 25.
Okay, good. You know these things because
Yes. And you don't have to pay for it if you're a senior, 65 and older.
okay. So
So
everybody in between,
has to pay.
yeah. And so if you can't afford it,
Mhm.
what do you do?
And not every drug is covered,
Right. Yeah.
right? But in between, and some of the medications are really expensive, like prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
I was complaining about a cream I needed for my psoriasis that was $150 a tube. I know people who have to pay like almost $100 for a pill that they will
Yeah.
take one time. So, there's a whole bunch of, areas where if the government was going to control our lives, here's a way you can do it.
Yeah.
You can turn around and ensure that everybody had access to healthcare by having proper healthcare, mental, physical, dental, eye, the whole works. By having proper healthcare, you also eliminate some of the other expenses that come from poor health. So the hospital visits, the ambulances, the drain on our social programs, things like that. All of these things are impacted because we don't have access to things. Dental, if your
Mm.
teeth are bad, it affects your heart, your lungs, your whole body is affected by this. And yet we don't have dental care, and dentists are really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, if you don't have certain things, so we got some work to do here
Yeah.
to get our country, working a little better. What did Fiona say? Same inadequate access in Western Europe and the UK, simply not enough psychiatrists and not allowing psychologists this role in testing. Too much big pharma oversight control. Yeah,
Yes.
you're absolutely right, Fiona.
Absolutely.
That's what
Yeah.
we're going through here too.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about that pharma control, they don't want people to get better. That's bad for business. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's so many questions that come up. And so when I look at the idea of M.A.I.D, I think this is fantastic. This is an opportunity for people who are not getting the care, who are not going to get the care they need,
Yeah.
who have given up hope. This is an opportunity for them to make a decision for themselves that they can hopefully control,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
provided the government doesn't step in and go, "Yeah, no, you don't qualify."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I think there's just so many questions around it. Now, one of the kind of upsides here in Canada is organ donation.
Mm.
There have been, well, in fact, Canada has the highest level of organ donation from M.A.I.D recipients than any other country.
Mm-hmm.
That's, it's wonderful when you think that somebody else gets a better quality of life as a result of this person who has passed. But again, that brings other questions, like who's deciding, that their organs are going to be donated, is, to make sure there's no pressure or whatever in that, so that we, we're not we're not causing, pushing people to donate their organs, that allowing that to be a choice that's made after they choose M.A.I.D.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is also an indication that we are choosing more and more and more organ donation as an option after we've left this body behind. And when you go for your driver's license, you get a card, you have an option to choose. So I think more and more people are choosing that, and it's an indication of that. So it's a greater awareness and a greater freedom of choice to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, because once I die, this body it doesn't need to be buried. It doesn't need to be intact. I'm done. I've stepped out of it. I've moved on to whatever else. And so to, sort of hold this body as sacred, that'd be like holding this dress as sacred. It's a dress. When it wears out, toss it and get a new one. Or when I get tired of it, toss it and get a new one.
Yes, and there are many religions that are not okay with that. That believe that the body needs to be preserved. The Jewish religion, for one, doesn't believe that one should even have tattoos on the body. Or, oh, I know, yeah, you couldn't be Jewish.
Jewish.
And that every piece of the body has to be buried and together when it's buried, and it has to be in a certain direction towards Jerusalem, and then I'm sure, other religions have those kinds of belief systems as well. And again, they are belief systems, right? Nobody knows these things for a fact. So we need to remind ourselves, these are belief systems, these are teachings that we have been taught to believe and to follow.
Yeah. And some of them have come out of necessity of the time. Like in the Jewish faith, the body has to be buried within 24 hours. Now, if we go back historically, because they didn't have embalming and all kinds of things way back when, the body would begin to smell, especially in a hot country. So the body needed to be in the ground quicker. So the 24-hour rule, is that a spiritual thing, or was it something that was born out of necessity for the time? Right.
And I'm not sure about that, because it could be, I don't know, it could have something to do with the soul. I don't know enough about that ritual. So it makes it very interesting to look into that. But again, first of all, I respect people's beliefs and choices. And I've had to deal with my own questioning and level of comfort in some of these things because of my own upbringing, my own conditioning, my own religion that I was born into. And so it's a journey. And recognizing, for me, I've come to recognize that God is not something in the sky that judges us, good or bad. To me, God is energy. God is love. Love is energy. Frequency is what everything is created out of, So that's what I've landed on for me. So therefore, religion, man-made religion, becomes something that's not as important for me to believe in and to follow.
Yeah, because it's created, and it was created at a time that, things were different. And we've created this dogma or doctrine and gone, here's how it has to be. I remember when I first, I wasn't raised with religion, so I feel fortunate in that regard. I mean, my family was Protestant Christian, I suppose, but my father agnostic, my mother was definitely Christian, but nobody practiced because my father wasn't going to allow that. But the reality is that when I first sort of had my spiritual awakening, it was in a Christian church. And the experience I had was powerful, life-changing. But as I stayed in that church for a time, I soon came to realize that there was too much control. You can't dance, you can't drink, you can't remarry if you're widowed or divorced. Divorce was illegal. You weren't allowed to dress in certain ways. I'm sure my tattoos would not be allowed. Like women could not be in a place of power. Women could not be ministers. And only people who accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior and Lord could actually go to heaven and I'm like, none of this is making sense to me, because the spiritual epiphany that I had was that God is the very essence of all that I am, and it is love. So there was a disconnect which caused me to leave. So it's interesting to see how we can evolve. And then, when it comes to the idea of death and dying, it's so controlled by religion. I think that's the biggest thing that has maybe caused governments and whatever to redefine what it looks like, is based around that, right?
Yeah. And Fiona shared the sad truth that in the UK, she was told by her youngest daughter who's studying psychology that in the UK, there's a 2-year waiting list to see a psychiatrist. And mental health, I mean, I know when I've been down in the pits to wait I needed help. I needed help then and there, which has helped me be able to live the life that I live. So I don't know how people can even, survive.
And there's no reason for this.
No.
Like, the government controls actually make it difficult for psychiatrists and psychologists and everybody to even do their work. So maybe that's why there's fewer people going into the field. But I think we have to look at how we're doing living so that we create a space for people to be able to do it in a productive and positive way.
Yeah.
Like, we're limiting life expectancy by not providing basic essentials. And that can change.
Well, it's, I think for me that it's very sad. In fact, it's sickening, as it makes me feel like really sick to my stomach to believe that people are just left suffering mental illness, something you can't see, something that's inside, and without supports and without just the right interventions, I don't know how people live. So, it goes to my mind to say, then I think to myself, oh, well, maybe if lots of people chose medically assisted dying and they were approved, they were supported, it's now going to reduce the load on the mental health system, which is a disgusting thought, but who knows what people think in higher places, right?
Exactly. They'll take a load off of the the weight on our systems. I think providing proper care reduces the load on our systems. We had a project that was done in the 70s in one of the cities in Manitoba called Mincombe, and in that, what they did was they created a no poverty zone. Education, all health treatment, dental, eye care, everything was covered by the government. Every person had a living wage. So if you were working at a job that you love, but you weren't getting paid, a living wage, the government gave you a subsidy. If you weren't working, you received a living wage. And they did this for 5 years. And what they found at the end of the 5 years was, the healthcare costs were dramatically reduced, like shockingly reduced. Of course, incarcerations, policing, all of that was reduced greatly. But here's the most interesting fact. Everybody worked. At the end of that 5 years, every adult was working unless it was a mom with little children.
Now, isn't it interesting that that was such a successful project, and yet, it's not being done anymore, and B, it hasn't been spread across the province, the nation, the country, the world, whatever you want to call it. Like,
Exactly.
that raises so many questions.
Well, you know what it does? And when I first heard about it was 50 years after it had happened. The government had to release the information at that point. But what happened was a change in government, and they went, well, we're not doing that anymore. And so they stopped it. But if we were to do that Canada-wide, and there are countries that provide education and all of this, but if we did that Canada-wide, the savings that we would have in healthcare alone would be multiple billions of dollars. And look at the reduction. Like right now in Calgary, and Wayne, you might know about this, but in Calgary, trying to get a family doctor, if you don't have one, pretty much impossible. And my daughter was telling me that waiting for an ambulance to come can take hours, not minutes the way it should, but can take hours to get. So if things like that are happening, that, basic needs can't be met because of the overloaded system.
In a first world country.
Let's stop overloading the system. Let us provide the care that's needed so people don't get sick.
Well, there is that piece, and there's also the piece about running a system more effectively. So I'll just give you an example. In South Africa, many years ago, I had a words are not coming to me today. I'm so sorry. A mammogram. I had a mammogram. Okay. I was there. I had a mammogram. There was a spot that was questionable. She took me, this was a female doctor, into the room next door. She had an assistant. They numbed the spot. They took a biopsy there and then. Okay. And before I left, so that the results could be almost immediate, right? Compared to here. Here you go, you have a mammogram. Then they find something. Now you've got to wait months, or I don't know, if maybe years now after COVID, to have a biopsy. These kinds of things. Like, there's a way to be more effective and practically, physically, and costly. So why aren't we looking at that rather than, medically assisted dying?
I love what Fiona just said. Love your courageous, spirited conversations, as too often spiritual communities are conflict avoidant. You are so right, Fiona. But, my thought is, you cannot ignore what's going on, like what's in your life, what's happening in the world around you. It's like, face it and go, now what? It is what it is. I have to be present with what is. And then from there, I can make a decision moving forward that might change things for the better.
Yeah.
But if I pretend and I suppress, all I do is create cancer and depression and whatever else in my body and mind. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we need to be talking about it. And like Wayne says, drive innovation. I wanted to point out the other thing that I find is so sad. I'm talking about private healthcare in South Africa. not public health care. My
Ah,
question is, why can public health care not be like private health care? Why does it need to be less than? It shouldn't be.
no, it shouldn't be. It
Yeah.
should be absolutely the same. And again, if we were looking after people, like if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, right? You know, the base of that, before we can get to self-actualization, the base of it is food and shelter, right? Like that base element, we need to have food, we need to have shelter. And if we have that, then we can move up to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have that,
Mm-hmm.
then we're lost.
Mm-hmm.
But if we provide that for people, but again, we've got, you know, lawyers becoming, you know, prime minister or presidents or whatever. And, you know, I don't know that the people who are in power have an understanding of what it takes to create an effective social system that actually supports the well-being of the country overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking about Canada specifically because that's where I live. And I love this country, and I think we have a lot of good things going for us. And I know we could do better, and I know that it would help with everything that we do
Mm-hmm.
in providing really great support for the people in this country.
Yeah.
When I look at even our welfare system in Ontario, that's a crime of epic proportions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, giving a mother and child, you know, something like $1,100 a month to live on. Can't rent you can't rent a bachelor apartment
Yeah.
in the city of Toronto
Yeah.
for that amount of money, let alone food and clothing and whatever. So
Yeah.
there's work to be done.
A lot of work to be done. And that's it, exactly it. Those are the things that cause health issues, that cause mental health issues. You know, so going back again to all the issues that we're trying to address have systemic causes that are not being addressed. And we just keep trying to put a plaster on the symptoms.
And that doesn't work. And there's so much stigma around certain health issues, around poverty, around mental health, even sexuality. Like there's just so much stigma around all of these things that until we start to recognize our interconnectedness and the importance of each one of us being seen as unique and special, that each one of us actually brings something remarkable into our life experience, into our world. Until we start seeing each other that way, we're going to continue to just mess up. You know, it's like that has to, you know, it has to stop. We got to do something bigger, brighter, better.
And that's why we have the conversations, right? For people to think about things, and maybe it will spark a shift in consciousness. Maybe it won't. But in order to change things, we need to see things differently.
We really do. We really do. And we can. You know, when I think about the Mincomb project, which anybody can research on the World Wide Web, it's there. You know, that to me was a perfect example of a system that actually worked. And the money that was spent to keep these people above the poverty line, that money was nothing. The savings covered it a zillion times, well, a few million times over, probably. Maybe not a zillion. I do like to
The
exaggerate.
point is, it was highly successful.
It was highly successful. And that was a combination of the provincial government was the New Democratic Party and the federal government was the Liberals. And that was when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was our prime minister. I can't remember who the premier was in Manitoba at the time. But it happened in Dauphin, Manitoba, for anybody who wants to look it up. The journey that we're on is really about how do we care for our planet? How do we care for our bodies, our minds, our souls? How do we create a world and a life that actually works for the highest and best good for all people? And I think that's what we're really hoping to do with some of the conversations we have here, is to spark the question, to
Mhm.
spark the imagination, so that each one of us can begin to think about life in slightly different ways, so we can get out of the little familiar box we're living in and maybe stretch our imagination into a bigger idea. What
Mhm.
do you think, Cheryl?
I think that was beautifully said, Barbara. Absolutely, exactly what you said was the reason that we do what we do.
Yeah, yeah. And it's fun.
Yes. It is fun. It's interesting because I certainly can get quite riled up myself and passionate about these topics. But it is passion. It's really, you know, wanting us to look at things, step back. Let's step back a bit and look at things and
Yeah,
observe.
yeah,
Observe what's going on. Observe what we're doing to the planet, to each other,
yeah,
to our countries, to just the whole gamut of things.
yeah.
And when we're able to observe, I think we're able to be more um, jeez, less involved. Less. I think what happens is we get involved in the minutiae of things.
We do.
When we step back, we are able to observe and be less impacted, more able to think clearly. When we are too involved, we're not able to think clearly, and we become part of the problem.
Absolutely, absolutely, we do. And I think there is to get into conspiracy theories, the level of fear that the majority of humanity lives with, I think, is fully structured.
Mhm,
Because when you keep people fearful, they don't pay attention
mhm,
to some of the things that are going on because they're so busy just trying to get through the day.
yeah,
And so I look at that, and it goes back to big pharma that, has priced medications way out of line for many people, that, you know, the whole medical field, it's difficult to get the services that are required. And I believe that, when it comes to that social net where, we provide for women and children, or men and children, or, people who need that extra support, I think we're afraid to give them money because we've been taught by, again, the powers that be, the top 2 or 3%, that, yeah, if you give them a handout, then they'll never do anything for themselves. And that is flat out untrue. There
mhm,
is a drive within us that when our base needs are covered, we have a desire for growth, for expansion. That is a spiritual reality. And
mhm,
so if we can begin to look after people where they are,
mhm,
give them a hand up when they need it,
mhm.
stretch out your hand. Lean on me. That was a great song. Lean on
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Because I'll tell you, together we make the world a better place.
absolutely.
And together we can overcome anything.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we can. And so, in closing, first of all, I want to encourage anybody who is listening, who may be feeling depressed or down or anxious, reach out, find out where you can get some help, reach out to a family member, reach out to a friend, somebody who will just sit with you and doesn't have to feel the need to fix you, because we all know that that's not what we're looking for.
You're not broken.
We're not broken.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is I encourage you to have courageous conversations with your family and friends. I know these are very difficult conversations to have, and some people will block them because they're not comfortable with it. But I think these are important things that we should be talking about, that we could be talking about. We shouldn't ourselves.
Don't shit on yourself.
Yeah.
Take good care of yourselves. Know that you are loved and appreciated, and reach out to your ministers, your church communities, your friends, family, whoever, and just know that you really are created unique and special, and you are required for the unfolding of the universe at this time. You're watching Spirit Cafe. We love you. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Namaste.
Namaste, everyone.
It's a sure thing. Change, change. Expect a miracle change. Watch me change when you change the way you look at